Welcome to our module, which covers an overview of the GP consultation. It provides an insight into the typical structure of a GP consultation and a wealth of tips, such as how to make your consultations more conversational, more patient-centered, more timely, and how to achieve that all-important aim of shared patient decision-making within the management plan. So now let us think about the basic objectives of any GP consultation. What does the patient think is going on? What are they worried about? What problems is it causing them? What do they expect from today's consultation? What do I, as a GP, think may be going on? The use of focused questioning and focused examination to differentiate between differential diagnoses and arrive at a working diagnosis. An explanation that is comprehensible to a patient, making sense of their symptoms, their situation, and making sense of the management plan that is going to follow. The management plan must, of course, be in line with current evidence base, but it needs to be tailored to the patient's situation such that it's feasible, achievable, and hopefully desirable to the patient so that they're able to commit to the plan. You also need a process in place whereby you know if the desired outcome fails to materialize, a way in which the patient is aware of what symptoms to look out for, what actions to take. So, when you actually look at a consultation unfolding with these basic objectives in mind, it's clear that the consultation is actually divided into two halves. The first half, where the patient is doing the bulk of the talking and the doctor using silence, active listening, succinct, focused questions to arrive at a working diagnosis. The second half of the consultation is one in which it's the doctor who does the bulk of the talking, as it's very much about information giving with a much reduced patient contribution. Before a patient knocks on the consultation door or you pick up the phone to ring them, it's important to be aware that a lot has already happened. The patient has been thinking as to what might be going on, and this is often influenced by their prior experience of illness, perhaps reading of social media, Googling their symptoms, or talking with family or friends. This will have also shaped their worries and what they're hoping from you in the consultation. They will have also been thinking about what they want to tell you, what they don't want to tell you, and as the appointment approaches, they will be rehearsing how they want to start the consultation. This is called the opening statement, and it's really important as it's often loaded with very useful information and a number of cues that can help you get to the patient's priorities for the consultation. So you need to help them get out that all-important opening statement. Let's think of a face-to-face consultation. It actually begins when they come through the door. So it's about establishing eye contact, your welcoming smile, and your friendly introduction. For example, it might be, "Hi, I'm Dr. Smith. Come on in. Please take a seat. How can I help you today?" That eye contact, smile, tone of your voice, and open question means that you are already encouraging the patient to get out their opening statement. This enables them to produce their rehearsed opening statement, and now you simply need to make sure they get it out in its entirety. So you need to show that you're listening in terms of your body posture, eye contact and facial expression. You're also going to be nudging them along with the occasional okay, yes, to ensure that they feel they're being listened to and that they get out their opening statement in full. Having done that, it's often useful to have another follow-up question. And the one that I commonly use is, just tell me a bit more about what's been happening. I find in real life this works very well and certainly works better than tell me a bit more. Because if you take that approach, some patients will often ask, about what, doctor? If you just add that little bit extra, just tell me a bit more about what's been happening. Patients will then often go and focus on the aspect of their story which is a priority to them. As a result of which, they start to give you more useful information, often laden with cues. Another useful open question to try next is, how's it been affecting you? This shows the patient that you're interested in them as a person, contributing to building rapport, and often it will unlock aspects of the psychosocial impact of their symptoms or problems, and maybe an opportunity for you to show empathy. We mentioned cues in the opening statement, and the cues that you're going to get after that follow-up open question. Tell me a little bit more about what's been happening. But what are cues and why are we so interested in them? Cues are the things that patients do or say that actually are sending out signals that the issue at hand is of real importance to them. It's a real priority to them. So what type of cues can you expect? Well, in the simplest form of verbal cues, it's often when you hear emotive words, when a patient is telling you, it's been so stressful, it's been difficult, it's been upsetting, I'm not coping, doctor, it's been terrible. Sometimes the verbal cues are repetitions. Perhaps you missed the first cue and the patient will represent it. So you may hear, with all that happened to Dad, and then a little bit later on you may hear again, with all that happened to Dad. And clearly there is some issue around what happened to Dad, which is actually central to why the patient is here. So if you're hearing these verbal cues, the things that are said, particularly emotive words, particularly repetitions, what do you do with them? Well, it's quite straightforward, really. You actually say what you hear. You mentioned Dad. You mentioned not coping. And by doing this, following it with silence, the patient will then explain what has really been going on. In terms of non-verbal cues, this of course is often around the way patients are dressed, the way they enter your consulting room, how they're sitting. Are they staring at the carpet? Have they got a closed body posture? Have they got poor eye contact? And of course, perhaps one of the most useful, of course, is their facial expression in terms of, do they look tired, brimming with tears? Do they look overtly nervous and stressed? Again, you can take the same approach. Say what you see. I can't help but notice you seem really down, followed by a pause. Let the patient then come back. And this again will get you to the real issues at hand. There are also situational cues. For example, if dad, who you never seen before, comes with a teenager, this may be around behavioural issues with the teenager. If it's a middle-aged woman with an elderly lady, you may be thinking, could this be about mum not coping? If it's a child that's been seen a couple of times with mum, and now the child with mum and dad are coming, it does suggest that perhaps the family really want this sorting out and have got some significant concerns. So we've touched lightly on how to deal with cues, this idea of just reflecting back what they've said or what you've seen. But you have to sometimes think about, do I present it immediately, handle the cue there and then, called fire and go? Or if the patient is actually in full flow, giving you really useful information, am I going to hang on to that cue, wait till they get to a natural pause in what they're telling you, and then play it? So stay and play later. It is really important to get good at spotting cues and cue handling. We do have a separate module that focuses in much more detail on the variety of cues you may come across, how you can deal with them, and why they're so important, and how you can use this all-important information not only to get to the priority of the consultation, but often to actually influence your explanations and your option shares and your review and safety netting plans. So you've now, of course, got your wonderful welcome. You've facilitated the opening statement. You've been actively listening for those all-important cues. You had your follow-up open question, and again listening for more cues. These cues will have given you some insight into the patient's ideas as to what's going on. It may have given you an understanding of what they're really been worried about, or what they were hoping from you in this consultation. It will have also often given you an insight into what impact their problems are having in terms of socially, relationships, family, work, other aspects of their life, or psychological impact. Now, if you've already got this information through your cue handling, okay, it's important you remember it. It's something that you're going to use. It's something that's going to actually shape your focused questioning. It's something that's going to shape your management plan. It will often influence the choice of management options that you first present to a patient, and will also have an impact on what your review and safety netting plans involve. Now, when you've reached this point, you've actually got to think, okay, well, I've taken this cue-led approach, but there are aspects of this social and psychological impact, these ideas, concerns, and expectations, collectively often called SPICE, that the patient hasn't shared with me. Now, it is important at this point to think about how you're going to explore these missing important bits of information. And remember, there is a reason why we choose to do it before we start doing the focused medical questions. And the reason, of course, is that through exploration of SPICE, it helps you maintain rapport with the patient. It helps you gain the patient's perspective of their situation. It enables you to appreciate, is this consultation purely about the medical management of the condition, or is there an element around ideas, concerns, expectations, or psychosocial that I've actually got to deal with? So getting spice out early before you ask medical questions actually speeds up your consultations, makes them more patient-centered, and ultimately delivers a more comprehensive management plan that satisfies the patient's needs. So going back to what I was saying, how do you explore spice when the cue-led approach hasn't given it to you in full? Of course, you can use direct questioning. Had you any ideas as to what's been going on? Or perhaps, had you any thoughts as to what's been causing this? In terms of concerns, it's great to talk about worries. Is there anything in particular you were worried about? In terms of expectations, you might say, given all that's gone on, had you any thoughts as to how I might best help you today? Now, direct questioning often works very well, but it can fail particularly if a patient is embarrassed, if a patient feels guilty about something, if a patient feels it's something that's difficult to talk about. And in this type of situation, sometimes you have to have a backup plan. So rather than perhaps the direct questions around thoughts, worries, hopes, you're going to have to take an indirect approach. An example might be, often my patients will Google things on the internet, and sometimes that can give them a really good idea as to what's going on. Sometimes it frightens them. And then just leave it hanging, give a pause. And then because you're actually talking about patients you've seen, yes, of course, you're exploring their thoughts and concerns, but it's not as direct. It makes it easier for the patient to talk about. Another strategy is something called My Friend John, where you actually allude to patients that you've seen. Well, you mentioned your headache. I mean, I've seen quite a few patients recently who've been really worried about their headaches and are thinking, could it be something serious? Might I need a scan? Is that you? And again, because you're talking about experiences you've had with other patients, it's not quite so confrontational, and the patient may then be able to admit their anxieties around brain tumour and need for a scan. Another option is called a square search, and this is one where perhaps the patient has mentioned, the lads at the golf club, people at work, their partner at home, and you allude to them. You mentioned your partner. Was there anything in particular your partner was worried about? You mentioned the lads at the golf club. I mean, had they come up with any ideas as to how I might help you today? Again, this indirect approach can often overcome that initial embarrassment, perhaps the guilt, that is going to prevent them responding to a direct approach. So this is something that's really worth practicing and actually thinking about how you're going to explore ideas, concerns, and expectations. In terms of psychosocial impact, direct questioning often does work, but you want it broad brush. You mentioned it's been affecting you at work. I mean, how's it been affecting you at home in terms of relationships and other aspects of your life? So it's through practicing. So what I would recommend is perhaps when you're seeing your next few patients is actually think, rather than just going, what are your ideas? What are your concerns? What are your expectations from me today? Try finding different ways of exploring it. Try and not to forget to explore psychosocial impact. That's, how is it affecting you in terms of home, work, family, other aspects of your life. See what information it gives. See how it really can influence the direction of your consultation. And by developing a repertoire, a different way of asking and exploring these key issues, it will help develop a more conversational approach. It will help the patient be able to disclose information that is difficult or personal or painful to them. In order to have a go at developing your different techniques and approaches for exploring thoughts, worries, hopes, and psychosocial impact with real patients, why not take some time out now and actually have a go? Just try and formulate the words you're going to use and get it right so it actually works for you. I'd like you to imagine a scenario where you have a patient in front of you, a middle-aged, self-employed lorry driver. If he's not working, he's not earning. A few weeks ago, he stumbled while walking the dog and hurt his back, and it just isn't getting better. Problems he faces is that, with the pain, he's struggling to work. If he's not working, he's not earning. So, he's thinking, might this be a back sprain? Might it be something more serious? Worried about the actual financial implications. And in terms of hopes, just wants anything that could make a difference, but not impact on his driving. So what you can do is, if you're by yourself, actually verbalize the questions that you would ask, because it's actually only through that process of verbalizing what you would ask that you will embed these new techniques. If you're with your trainer, get your trainer to role play being the patient and then get that feedback from your trainer as to how it worked. If you're in half-day release, break into trios. One be a patient, one the doctor, and the other an observer, actually detailing what you said or did that helped explore these key components of the early half of a consultation. So pause the video, have a go, and then when you're done, restart the module. So having taken a cue-led approach to the opening statement and having explored the patient's thoughts, worries, hopes, and the psychosocial impact, often the patient will have disclosed a situation that has been difficult for them, upsetting, painful, distressing. This is an opportunity to show sympathy, or preferably empathy. Sympathy is the expression of sorrow for a patient's situation. For example, I'm really sorry to hear about your dad and his death. Sympathy does have some value in a consultation. It is showing that you're listening. It's showing you that you're a sympathetic person, and therefore it can contribute to building or maintaining rapport. The way in which you do it is important. It's very important for the patient to actually finish what they're saying when they're describing the distressing situation. You've got to wait for that natural pause where you can come out with your sympathetic statement. And most importantly, having done so, you must stop and allow the patient to acknowledge your sympathy. One of the things that I often hear when they're listening to recordings where trainees have realized that they need to show sympathy, but under the pressure of time, it becomes gabbled and uncaring. So you'll hear something like, "Oh, doctor, and then Dad died. It was such a terrible time." Patient starts crying, and the GP then overtalks the crying patient. "Oh, I'm very sorry to hear about your dad. So now let's just talk about your low back pain and how that's been affecting you." Of course, this sounds uncaring. It's very much formulaic. It's not actually contributing anything to the consultation and may actually damage rapport. Empathy is actually more powerful than sympathy, and it's used in the similar situations. But empathy is about you expressing your insight into the patient's situation and the impact it's having. So an example might be, "Gosh, with your dad dying, I can really appreciate that's had a massive impact, not only for you, but for your family." Again, followed by the pause, allowing the patient to acknowledge that empathetic statement. And what empathy is doing is showing that you really are listening to the patient, that you understand their situation, and very powerfully contributes to the development and the maintenance of rapport. And it's through that understanding, or their perception of your understanding, that is very much going to contribute to achieving a shared decision making. So we've mentioned rapport. So, what does this really mean? It's about achieving a comfortable relationship with a patient within a consultation, so that the patient may feel able to disclose something that is painful, embarrassing, something that's difficult to talk about, that they wouldn't normally have mentioned. So how do you achieve it? Well, you've got to think of it in terms of verbal and non-verbal approaches. In terms of the non-verbal approaches, it really begins as the patient walks through the door. The eye contact, the smile, the welcome, the open body posture, showing that you're actively listening to a patient. Your facial expression conveying that you're interested in them and what's unfolding. Verbally, in terms of establishing rapport, it focuses about being interested in them and their situation. And that often relates, of course, to that exploration of their thoughts, worries, hopes, and psychosocial impact. It's about really listening to what they're saying. So cue handling becomes very important. It's about conveying your understanding of their situation. And this is why empathy is so important. And of course, you've got to be taking a positive approach such that the patient feels that you're on their side. Another thing to consider is that in terms of maintaining rapport, it's important not to surprise a patient. So always remember to signpost, explain why you're asking, explain why you're examining, and through a patient feeling that you're interested in them, listening to them, understanding them, and are out there to help them or on their side, you're very much going to have that comfortable relationship that is rapport. Now it's time for you to have a go at showing genuine empathy. What I want you to do is to think about how you would respond to a patient who describes the following situation. "Doctor, it's just been horrible. I mean, with the first lockdown, I was furloughed. And, it was a difficult time with the homeschooling and the financial implications of it all. Then went back to work and, lo and behold, the second wave came and we were furloughed again. But this time I was made redundant. Now, this has had a massive impact for me, the family, our finances. It's just been a really, really difficult time. So, having listened to that, what I need you to do is to actually formulate your response. If you're by yourself, just have a shot, give it a go. If you're with your trainer in a tutorial, your trainer can role play the patient and give you objective feedback about how well your show of empathy worked. If you're in half-day release, break into trios. One of you role play the patient, one be the doctor, and the other writing down what you said or did that helped contribute to a genuine show of empathy. So pause the video, have a go, and when you're ready, resume the module. Now we need to think about your consultation style. The way that doctors talk with patients has evolved in recent years. The old-fashioned, hierarchical, paternalistic, doctor-centered approach is long gone. What patients expect, what your examiners expect, is a more conversational approach. So you have to imagine, how might I talk to perhaps a neighbour or a non-medical friend who's presenting me with a medical problem? And it's that style of consulting that you need to be employing. So how do you do this? Well, first of all, there has to be a natural, logical progression to your questioning. So your questions that you're asking have got to intuitively follow on from what the patient has just said. Another aspect is actually using reflection, just reflecting back some of the words that the patient said. You mentioned you were struggling at work, and that way, again, it shows that you're listening. But reflection is something we use a lot in normal consultations, and is a great way of facilitating a data gathering. If you're going to change the direction of questioning, you need to signal this to the patient so it doesn't become a surprise. For example, you mentioned that you are struggling at home. I mean, has it been affecting you in terms of work or other aspects of your life? You've been mentioning about what's been going on with your palpitations and your shortness of breath. And I've got to now start thinking around what might be causing it. And what's going through my mind is, could it be? So you've actually taken the patient through the transition in questioning. Also, it's important you don't surprise the patient. So the idea of signposting, explaining why you're asking. Example might be, just to make sure that I'm not missing anything serious, I just need to know if you had any problems with regards to changes in your bowel habit, blood in your motions, losing weight unexpectedly. So the patient's able to actually understand why you've suddenly changed your questioning. They're not surprised by it. They understand it's got value to them, and they're still engaged with you. Of course, any conversation involves both parties, so the patient actually has to make contributions. They have to feel part of the discussion, and this is particularly true in the first half, but is also true when it comes to agreeing a management plan. Another aspect of being conversational is just the natural empathy that you would show a neighbour or a friend when they were describing something difficult, upsetting or distressing. So when you pull it all together, the idea of using language you'd use with a friend and the same type of vocabulary you might use with a friend or a neighbour, the natural progression in your questioning, the use of techniques such as reflection with direction change, signposting, encouraging patient contribution, and showing empathy, all combine to deliver this conversational approach to the consultation. Now we need to think about moving the consultation on, and it's time for focused medical data gathering. You've got to consider, with the symptoms that they've provided, what is the likely differential diagnosis. You've also got to consider what sinister or serious conditions might I need to exclude. In medical school, and often in hospital, you have an approach which involves a review of systems, this idea of asking banks of questions around systems that then, when pulled all together, give you a real appreciation of not only what the differential diagnosis is, but what the likely working diagnosis is. The problem is this is really time consuming, and you just don't have time to do this in a GP consultation. You have to take a different approach. What you've actually got to do is actually consider the key sifting questions. That is to say, questions that will differentiate one differential from another. And it is by using just these key sifting questions that you can rapidly exclude diagnoses from your differential and arrive at the working diagnosis. This takes real practice, and one exercise that can be very helpful, which you can do either by yourself, with your trainer, or in half-day release, is what we in Pennine call the stick man and woman exercise. So how does this work? We get our registrars in half-day release to draw a child stick man representation or a stick woman representation. We then allocate to different groups of registrars the head and neck, the upper limbs, the chest, abdomen and pelvis, and the lower limbs. And then what those groups of registrars have to go away and do is actually create a list of the common symptoms relating to that part of the anatomy that they actually see in everyday real UK general practice. Having done that, they then have to consider what are the sifting questions that I need to ask to differentiate between these differential diagnoses. They then have to also consider, are there any sinister or serious conditions that I need to exclude, and what are those red flags? And by taking this approach, literally starting from the top of the head, working down to their feet, they have compiled a list of common differentials for common symptoms, the key questions that give you that focused, quick data gathering, and embedded the red flags questioning for sinister or serious conditions. So this is an exercise that I would encourage you to do, as it will very much speed up your focused medical data gathering. You've now done the bulk of the data gathering, and you're usually around about minute 4 or minute 5. By this stage, you've got a really good idea of what the working diagnosis is likely to be. What you want to do is just check in with the patient to make sure you've actually understood the priorities of the consultation before embarking on examination, if examination is required. So how do you do this? Well, what you can do is what's called a micro summary. But the way you do it is actually very important if it is going to add value to your consultation. So what do we mean by a micro summary? A micro summary is just signposting to a patient that you're going to present them with what you feel are the key priorities. It should be no more than 30 seconds in length. Having presented the priorities, you then need to check in with the patient to see whether you've got it right. So it's that question, is that about right? Followed by an all-important pause. You need to get the patient yes set. And they go, oh yes, doctor. And this is great because you know that in the next 5 or so minutes you are actually dealing with the key issues at hand. And you won't have that heart sink moment when the patient, usually round about minute 9, after you've gone through your explanations and option shares, actually says, oh doctor, in actual fact, the real reason I'm here is... That is a heart sink moment and something we've all experienced. So a micro summary can avoid that. And I'll just give you an example of what a micro summary might sound like and what it contains. The micro summary usually just focuses on what you think are the key points. So it's not a detailed list of their symptoms. It's really about the issues at hand, and often it contains aspects of their worries, thoughts, hopes, or psychosocial impact. So an example might be, before I examine you, just to recap, you mentioned you're a self-employed lorry driver. If you're not working, you're not earning. Your back has been really painful since the trip and you really need it fixing to get back to work. Is that about right? So as you can see, it doesn't take long, but it integrates the key elements of what you believe to be the priorities of the consultation. When the patient agrees, not only do you and they know that you're working together to manage the issues at hand, but it also contributes rapport because it shows that you really have been listening. It gives you confidence because you know that you're on track. It speeds up the consultation. Micro summaries are something that need practicing. They don't come naturally, and often you see registrars thinking they need to do a summary, and they then embark on a long-winded representation of everything the patient said. And then having done that, they go, and now I'm going to examine you. There's no pause, there's no yes set. So it's actually become a time-occupying lesion, something that is not desirable to either party. So have a go at practicing micro summaries. It will take a little while to get it right, but it's something well worth doing because you'll find that it actually has a profound impact both for you and the patient. Now it's time for you to have a go at spotting some of these consultation skills. Pause the video. Go to the Blackboard folder for this module and identify the Gender Identity YouTube clip. You'll also need to download the first half consultation skills assessment sheet. What you'll need to do then is to watch the first 5 minutes of this YouTube clip. And you must write down what the doctor says or does, which you feel helps them achieve one of the consultation competencies. After the 5 minutes, stop the video. Have a look at the phrases that she used to achieve those competencies. Think about what she did and the approach she took, reflecting on how you might use this in some of your consultations going forward. What would be very helpful is if you, with your trainer, could have a go at role-playing this first 5 minutes where they play the patient and you the doctor, as a way of embedding some of these new consultation skills. If you're in HDR, then what you could do is 3 of you form a breakout room. One be the patient, one the doctor, and the other observer using the assessment sheet. And each of you have a go in these different roles. So again, embedding these new skills and developing your linguistic competency. Having done that, the half-time whistle has definitely blown, and it's time for coffee.